Everybody having a good week? Everybody having a quiet week, apparently. Nobody's speaking. I have a list of announcements on my desk, so if you want to know what I'm supposed to announce, it's in there. So I'm just going to go from memory and hope I get it all. First of all, Sunday, regular schedule of services on Sunday, 9:30 Sunday school or 9:15, depending on what class you're in, and then 10:30 for church. Following our morning service, we're going to have a quarterly congregational meeting and communion. So hope you'll plan on staying for that on Sunday. That'll be immediately following the morning service. As we have been doing, we take a short break, just kind of gather kids, and then we'll be back in the auditorium for kind of a second service of communion in our quarterly congregational meeting. So plan on that on Sunday. Second announcement, small groups are starting up, and so if you have not yet signed up for one of those, you can do that. The Church Center app, you can do that, I believe, online. You can see Pastor Stephen. He's a genius. And he laughs. He can help you get signed up with that. There will be one. I will be leading one here at the church on Sunday evening at 6, and so you can be a part of that one, or the others are in people's homes. Some on Sunday night. There's a couple throughout the week. So if you have questions about that, let me know. Or let Pastor Stephen know. If you let me know, I'm going to send you to Pastor Stephen anyway. So maybe just skip the middleman. He knows he's the one heading up the organization of that. And so plan on that starting. Those are sermon-based small groups. And what we do as a part of our small groups, remember those are about three things: Bible study, prayer, and fellowship. And so what we do is kind of take the Sunday morning message and then just kind of ask some questions and generate some discussion about what we do with it. I think it's easy to sit and listen to a message and we fill our minds with stuff, and too often in churches, messages and teachings and stuff like that just become like data dumps. Everything the pastor studies all week and then dumps it all in, and we don't do anything with it. And the point of the small groups is kind of generate some discussion about what we do, how it should impact our lives or change our lives. And so I hope you'll plan on being a part of those in one form or another, all right? Last announcement is this: deacon nominations are starting up. Every year we elect deacons to serve the congregation in line with the scriptural teaching. Acts 6, really it starts with Acts 6, where the work of the ministry becomes too much for the apostles there and the leaders of the early church. And so they tell the church at Jerusalem, you, the church, select from among you, the church, 7 men who are filled with the Spirit and have various certain qualifications. And so what we want to do here at Evangel is honor that process that you, the church, selects from among you certain people. And so we start the process with the congregation as members of the church. And if you're a member, you can do this online. You should have received an email. Consider the qualifications, Acts 6 and 1 Timothy 3, verses 8 through 13, where it describes what kind of the deacons should be. And then if there's somebody in the membership of the church that you believe meets those qualifications, nominate that person in writing, either on the form, the online link you received. You can write that on a piece of paper, give it to me, Pastor Jerry, Pastor Stephen, one of the current deacons. You can drop that in the offering box. We'll get it that way. You can drop it in the church office. You can mail it. You can do any way you want to get it to us. And then what we do is we take all those names and sort through them. And then in December, we will present to the church body a group of men for the office of deacon, and we will vote on them at that time. But again, in keeping with what I think the Bible teaches, it starts with the congregation choosing men, and then we refine that list down. So pray about that, participate in that if you're a member of the church, all right? If you didn't get that email, it's probably because or that text message, it's probably because you're not a member, in which case see me, because we can fix that too. But we do have a membership class coming up soon. We haven't settled on an exact date for that, trying to work out details. So if you're interested in formal membership and kind of what the next steps are, what it means to be a part of Evangel, it'd be a great opportunity, all right? I believe that's all the announcements I have. At least that's all the announcements I'm going to make. And we're going to pray and jump into the Bible tonight, all right? Let's pray together. Father, thank you for your grace and the love you showed to us in Christ. Thank you for the hope that you've given us, and even through the Scriptures, as we're reminded, these things are written for our examples, upon whom the end of the ages have come. They're written for our hope, that we, through the encouragement of the Scriptures, might have hope. And so teach us with it tonight. Encourage us to remember you, not just in the interesting stories, but as the sovereign over all things. Teach us to live our lives in light of that. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen. All right, we are in Kings and Kingdoms, 1 Kings, and so or 2 Kings, if you'll turn there. Just kind of review briefly where we have been, and by way of doing that, I have a all of a sudden that looks kind of dark, and I don't know why. We'll have to, doesn't look as bright as it should be. I'll turn that light off for a minute so you can see it. This is the kings of the divided kingdom. Remember, there are three kings of the united kingdom, right? Who are the three kings of the united kingdom? Saul, David, Solomon, right? Saul, David, Solomon. And each of those reigned for about 40 years from about 1050. And again, remember, the dates are a little bit fuzzy back there. We don't know the exact dates, but somewhere around 1050 to 1011 for Saul, 1011 to 970 for David, 970 to 930 for Solomon. Those are generally the dates that are pretty widely accepted by those who study it. All right, then we go into the divided kingdom. Northern kingdom is called Israel. The southern kingdom is called Judah. Little handy labels there for you. Remember, after the divided kingdom, when you see the title Israel, it is almost always referring to the northern kingdom. It is no longer the whole nation. Now that will, it'll come back to the whole nation by the time of Christ in the New Testament. But for this period of history, Israel and Judah are the two kingdoms. Jeroboam and then Rehoboam was the first king of the southern kingdom. You notice the gaps. The gaps are to try to, as much as possible, kind of line up the dates. So you see King Asa, 911 to 870. In that same time period, you have five kings: Nadab, Baasha, Elah, Zimri, Omri. All right, so the dates, the reason why there are gaps is to kind of line up the dates. The promise of God to David goes through which kingdom? Judah, the southern kingdom. That is the line of David's king, and that was a promise to Solomon, right? I'm going to take the kingdom away from you, yet not all of it, because I made a promise to your father David. And that goes through the southern kingdom. We've been down in the last few weeks, Ahab, Jehoshaphat down there, and here is page 2 of that. Ahab, Jehoshaphat, again, that just picks up really what is the last two lines on the first screen. Continue here, just kind of reproduce that. Now we're in this place where you have really some very similar sounding names, right? Joram, Jehoram. And in the Bible, you'll see both Joram and Jehoram, both for a southern and a northern kingdom. All right, and again, as I've said, one of the hard parts of this is trying to keep the names straight. Just trying to remember which king belongs to which kingdom. All right, Jehu, Ahaziah, both started at the same time. Ahaziah runs for 1 year. Athaliah, who was Athaliah? Yeah, she was the granddaughter of Omri, who was the northern kingdom. So there's kind of little crossover there. Joash, and then on this side you have Jehoahaz and Jehoash, which again you will see sometimes as Joash. So both of those names are kind of interchangeable. You got one in each kingdom, and oftentimes when you're reading the Bible, it'll specify Joash of Judah or Joash of Israel. Sometimes you just got to pay attention to what you're reading, which is always a good idea to pay attention to what you're reading. All right, but there's kind of where we're at. So if we're coming now to 2 Kings chapter 11, and I'm going to turn this light back on for the sake of the video, because I think that'll doesn't help out at all. Doesn't matter. Well, that screen's brighter now anyway, so you can see it. All right, so we are in 2 Kings 11. Now, coming out of 2 Kings 10, you have Jehu as a kind of a destructive person in the northern kingdom. He was appointed by God. He destroys, kills a bunch of people, most notably both the kings of the north and the south. He kills Joram and Ahaziah, both of them. All right. Now we come to 2 Kings 11, where we pick up new tonight. Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah. Now, let me point out what's going on here on the screen. You notice Athaliah is actually below Ahaziah, right? But she's the mother of Ahaziah. Now, here's what happens is after the death of Ahaziah, Athaliah tries to take the throne for herself. All right, she tries to do that, and how she does that, when she sees her son is dead, she gets up and destroys all the royal offspring. She kills all the sons of Ahaziah, which means she killed who? Her grandchildren, her grandsons. I mean, how desperate for power do you have to be? Now, why might Athaliah have done that? It's hard to know for sure. I mean, she wanted power, but it may have been that she was actually trying to reunite the kingdoms, because remember, she is the granddaughter of Omri, and trying to use this political power to kind of bring things back together. It's not entirely clear. It was certainly a power play to gain power. It may have had to do with her connection to the northern kingdom. There is Jehosheba, who is the daughter of King Joram, the sister of Ahaziah. So again, here we are, trying to sort through all these names and trying to figure out who is who. But Jehosheba is a daughter. She takes Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him from among the king's sons who were being put to death, and placed him and his nurse in the bedroom, and they hid him from Athaliah, was not put to death. Now again, at this time, Joash is probably an infant. All right, now, the reason we know that is because we can do math. All right, and so you notice her reign, Athaliah's reign, is 841 to 835, which is 6 years or maybe 7. All right, it's hard to tell, because if she starts in 841, you have 41, 40, 39, 38, 37, 36, 35. All right, again, that's that issue of where do you start the first year? Is it the partial year, the whole year, the accession year, the regnal year, those kind of dating things. But 6 or 7 years, she's king, and she's queen. And if you notice in chapter 11, verse 21, Joash is 7 years old when he becomes king, which means he was an infant. She's killing all these grandchildren, however many there were, putting them to death. And Jehosheba, the sister of Ahaziah, grabs one of them. Why Joash? I have no idea why Joash is opposed to the others. Maybe the closest one, maybe the one she knew a little better. I have no idea. But he was the one she chose. And they hide him from Athaliah. He was not put to death. Now, why is this important? Because what Athaliah is about to do, if she gets her way, is to end the reign of David's family. I mean, if she gets her way, all of David's descendants will now be dead in terms of reigning. And so Jehosheba shows up to save the day, and in so doing, to save the promise of God to David and to the nation. And it lasts for about 6 or 7 years. Again, depending on exactly the dating and when this happens, how long this takes place. Now here's what happens in the 7th year. Jehoiada. Now Jehoiada is the priest. Now remember, in Israel you have kings and priests and prophets, right? How did you become a king? Because your dad was a king, right? Your mom was a queen in some cases, but it was by birth. How did you become a priest? Same way, by birth. You were born into the family of priests, the Levitical priests. How did you become a prophet? By God's call. All right, that's the different one. The prophethood, so to speak, the kingship, the priesthood, and the prophethood, prophet, whatever, that came by a special call of God. But Jehoiada is a priest, and there's something in Jehoiada that appears to be godly. Now, that was not true of all the priests. There were bad priests. And in fact, remember Ezekiel, in notable chapters, particularly Ezekiel 34, Ezekiel, he has some very harsh words for priests. Very harsh words. So not all the priests, you think of priests, you might think of them like pastors today in this sense, that you have some good ones and you have some bad ones. And it's not always clear who is who. All right. Jehoiada is a good one. 7 years into this, He brings the captains of hundreds, the Kerites, the guard, all these guards of the city, guards probably of the palace and the temple. He gets them together. He makes a covenant with them, puts them under oath in the house of the Lord, and shows them king's son. Now, apparently, it appears that almost nobody knows that Joash exists. I mean, Athaliah is the queen. They think everybody's gone. I don't know that they've connected this with the Davidic covenant yet. So he gets all these guards together and says, hey, guys, I got a little secret for you, but before I tell you, you have to swear an oath. You got to make a covenant with me. And then he brings out the king's son. He says, this is what you do. A third of you who come in on the Sabbath shall keep watch over the king's house, a third at the gate, a third behind the gate of the guards. You keep watch over the house. 2 parts of you, verse number 7, go out, keep watch over the house of the Lord. You shall surround the king, each with his weapons in his hand. Whoever comes in the rank shall be put to death, and be with the king when he goes out, when he comes in. So he is swearing them, causing them to take an oath to guard the king, who they didn't even know existed until like 5 minutes ago. All right? They surround him. They bring him out. Verse number 10, they give him the spears and shields that have been King David's that were in the house of the Lord. The guards stood, each with his weapons in his hand, from the right side of the house to the left side of the house, by the altar and by the house around the king. Then he brings the king's son out, puts the crown on him, gave him the testimony. What's the testimony? Probably the scroll is a copy of the law. That's the testimony, which again was the governing document. Now remember, the law of Israel, that Mosaic covenant, those laws were kind of the governing documents of Israel, kind of the constitution, you might think of it as. They made him king, they anointed him, they clapped their hands and said, long live the king. This is a great celebration for a few people. Athaliah hears the noise, and she comes to the people. She looks in, and the king is standing by the pillar, according to the custom. The captains and trumpeters beside the king, and the people of the land rejoiced and blew trumpets. And Athaliah tore her clothes and cried, treason, treason. Oh, the irony. She's the one who killed all of the rightful inhabitants of the throne, and she's the one yelling treason. Jehoiada the priest commanded the captains of the hundreds who were appointed over the army. He said, bring her out between the ranks, and whoever follows whoever follows her, put to death with the sword. The priest had said, don't put her to death in the house of the Lord. So they seized her when she arrived at the horses' entrance of the king's house. She was put to death there. All right, they kill her. Why? All right, she had no rightful claim to the throne. All right, she was a wicked queen who had ruled unjustly, who had led the people into evil, and who had tried to stamp out the covenant that God had made with his people. Now again, it would be interesting to know in the mind of Athaliah, did she know that she was attempting to end the Davidic covenant? It does kind of seem so. It does kind of seem that she's trying to, because of her connection with her grandfather Omri and the house of Omri on the other side, it does seem like she's trying to bring them back together. Okay? Now, regardless of all that, what you see is that Athaliah becomes to the people a symbol of the evil. And so they go, after she is dead, look at this, Jehoiada then, verse 17, makes a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people. It's kind of this three-way covenant. What is it? I think it's a covenant of renewal. Right? Now remember, all the way back at the foot of Mount Sinai, the Mosaic covenant starts with what? I'll be your God, you'll be my people, you'll be to me a kingdom of priests if you keep my law. And the people said, all that you have said we will do. They made this covenant. And so many times through those years, they had broken that covenant. And Jehoiada the priest gets them all back together and reminds them of this covenant. And it's not just a covenant between the Lord and the king, but between the king and the people, between the Lord and the people. There's this three-way covenant that they would be the Lord's people. As a result of this, they all get together, go down to the house of Baal, tear it down, his altars, his images. They broke in pieces thoroughly. They killed Matan, the priest of Baal, before the altars. And the priest appointed officers over the house of the Lord. All right? So again, they go and again wipe out the worship of Baal. Now, how had it come back? Remember, we had seen previously, after the time of Jehu, that a lot of the Baalism had gone. Right. Yeah, they still worshiped the calf, the golden calf, which was that syncretism. The Baalism was kind of a distinct thing beside that. Right? So when the altars of Baal, remember when Jehu gets all the worshipers of Baal together and says, hey, you think Ahab worshiped Baal a little, Jehu's going to worship him a lot. Let's get them all here and let's have this great worship celebration. And he kills them all. And everything. Well, that's a great thing, which it was. But Jehu never went the full way. He never separated himself from the sins of Jeroboam. And he's both praised and cursed for that. You did good things and you also did bad things. In this case, probably the time of Athaliah had brought a lot of the Baalism back. Because people tend to revert. We tend to fall back into the old ways. And that's what the people done. Now here again, with this covenant renewal ceremony, as Jehoiada reminds them, these are the promises that we have made as a nation. They get fired up and go in and destroy it all again. So the people of the land rejoiced. The city was quiet. They put Athaliah to death with the sword at the king's house. Jehoash was 7 years old when he became king. What happens next is, in chapter 12, becomes the summary of Joash's reign. All right, he becomes king in the 7th year of Jehu. Jehu 841, same year Ahaziah, same year as Athaliah. 7 years later, 835, Joash becomes king. Now here's the summary, 12:1-3. He reigns 40 years. His mother's name was Zibiah of Beersheba. He did right in the sight of the Lord all his days in which Jehoiada the priest instructed him. That's an interesting phrase, isn't it? It's going to show up again, and we'll see the reason for that in a little bit. But all the days of Jehoiada, Joash does what's right. Only the high priests were not taken away. The people still sacrifice and burn incense on the high places. Now this is, again, a fairly frequent occurrence during the time of the kings. You have kings who lead people back towards God. The good kings of the south, they lead people back to God. They're said that they do right in the eyes of the Lord, but the high places were not taken away. The people still sacrifice and burn incense on the high places. What's wrong with that? Again, it's probably a sense of syncretism. Larry?
Can we go back to verse 21?
Yes.
Joash is Jehoas.
Yes.
And that was part of the Judah or the southern kingdom.
There are multiples.
Right.
Yeah.
Not the Joash.
It's the Joash of the southern kingdom, right? The Jehoash, and this is where, again, you see the names. You got Joram, number 9, and Jehoram, number 5, are both called Jehoram and both called Joram.
Okay.
All right, same thing with Joash. Jehoash and Joash are both called Jehoash and both called Joash. So it's one of those kind of quirks of Hebrew.
But the one they're referring here was the one from the southern kingdom.
In verse number 21 is the southern kingdom, right?
Then you started to talk about the northern kingdom and called Joash again.
No. In chapter 12, verse 1, in the 7th year of Jehu, Jehoash becomes king. That's the southern kingdom, Joash. So chapter 12, verse 1, the 7th year of Jehu, 841, the 7th year is 835. So, and remember, when you read, usually the dates of reigning by the kings are compared to the king in the other kingdom. So you have in such and such a year of the northern king, the southern kingdom begins to reign. In such and such a year of the southern king, the northern kingdom. So they're compared to each other, and that's how we come up with these dates.
Yeah, the confusion is the spelling.
The spelling, yeah, right, yeah.
Verse 1 is the same.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, but it is the the Jehoash of 21 and the Jehoash of 12:1 are the same person. Right? Hey, this is where those names they can get confusing. He doesn't take the high place away. All right, the high places were places of idol worship typically. Now, again, they're called high places because they are They're high. They're elevated. Nothing behind that is just a geographical reference. The reason, though, most likely was because in a city, it would be a place that was easily seen because it's higher than the other places. To some degree, it was a place that in the minds of some was a little closer to heaven, right? Because the higher you get off the ground, you're a little closer to heaven, a little closer to the so-called abode of the gods outside of our material world. A lot of different reasons why it was, but they were known for places of idol worship. I take it at this place in chapter 12, verse 3, the high places were not taken away. It is either a reference to some kind of syncretism. It might be a reference to the kind of backsliding of Joash at the end of his life. And if I speed up, we might even get there tonight. So let's press on. All right. Chapter 12, beginning verse 4, is probably the most familiar story from the life of Joash, and that is the repairing of the temple. This is the one, you learn everything you learn about Joash in Sunday school. You got to have the temple story, right, in the box. So here's how it starts. During those years, the temple had been left in poor repair. Probably during the years of Athaliah, she didn't care about the temple. It was left to degenerate. It was left to kind of run downhill. He begins to notice this, and he says to the priest, when people bring money in, let's use that money to repair the damages of the house where any damage may be found. He wants to restore the temple to its place of glory. Now remember, at this time, this is still the Solomonic temple, the first temple. All right, so you have the tabernacle, Solomon builds a temple. This is still the temple of Solomon, even though we're probably 130 to 40 years later. All right, the second temple period, and you'll see this in the Bible, and you'll see this from time to time, the second temple period is actually after the exile, starting about 536. So this is the first temple. The second temple period is the one that was rebuilt after the exile, and that is the second temple period is the time of Jesus. All right, so just kind of keep those categories in your mind. It's kind of run down. Gather some money. Let me point out one phrase here. How many of, look at verse 5, let the priest, the money comes in, which man's heart, let the priest take it for themselves, each from his acquaintance. How many of you have each from his acquaintance? All right, who has something else? Just out of curiosity. Every man of his acquaintance? Donor? Each from his donor? Okay. What? Constituary? Okay. Treasurers? There's an RSV man back there. NIV. It's also what the RSV had. What does it mean? It's a really confusing phrase in the Hebrew. I'll be honest with you, as I've kind of read and studied this, it's not entirely clear who this is. It's probably one of two things. Either the treasurer, each man from his treasurer, right? The one who is handling, so all the money is brought in, and there's a treasurer who then distributes it. It could be that. It might be, the other predominant suggestion, it might be each man from his own money. All right, the money that he was in charge of, the money perhaps even that he had received, he was to put his own resources back into the temple. Now, I point that out just because you wonder, each man from his acquaintance, what does that mean? Probably treasurer is my guess, that there was a treasurer who handled the money, and you got the money from the treasurer and spent it to kind of rehab the building. Came about in the 23rd year of King Jehoash. The priests had not repaired the damages. Now, what year did it start? We don't know, but we know by the 23rd year it's been long enough for something to have been done. And so we don't know that, again, the timing here is not clear. 23 years into this, Joash says, wait a second, guys, we're not making progress. Here's what we need to do is repair the damages. The way they do it is this, where Jehoiada the priest takes the box, puts a hole in the lid, and people coming in drop money in it, right? So that's our Sunday school offerings, right? Now, here's what's interesting about this. See, when you and I think about offerings, we think about coins and dollars and stuff like that, right? This is prior in history up to this time, coinage, money as coinage probably isn't used at all, much, if at all. Coins probably, historians tell us coins probably begin about 650 BC. So coins are still 250 years in the future, 200 years in the future at this point. It's probably gold and silver. Earrings, jewelry, stuff like that. Remember when Aaron builds the golden calf, the people bring jewelry, right? as their gift. That's probably what it is. And then they use that again to pay the workers. There's a lot of money comes in. They use it. It's weighed out. Verse number 11. The hands of those who did the work, they had oversight. They paid it out to carpenters and builders, stonemasons, stone cutters, wood workers, all those people. Here's the interesting. Look down at verse number 15. They did not require an accounting from the men into whose hand they gave the money to pay those who did the work, for they dealt faithfully. I mean, the temple, the work on the temple was of such a nature that nobody dared mess with it. I from time to time, the people treat the church that way still today. You can gyp a lot of jobs, but a lot of people have this attitude, don't do that to the church. It's a good thing, all right? Even as a pastor, I get that from time to time. Don't cross the pastor. Like, I wish everybody felt that way, but not everybody does. But there's the idea that the house of the Lord is a special place, and people were faithful. They did what they said we're going to do. We're getting ready to do this building project out here and trying to finalize the details and get on a time frame for that. We will be accounting for all the money. We're not as trustworthy, or as trusting. I should say that we're not as trusting as they are. Hopefully, the people are as trustworthy. It's just kind of interesting, kind of the way they go about that. The money was brought in, and so the temple was repaired. Now here's another. Skip down to verse number 17. Now Hazael, the king of Aram, went up, fought against Gath, and captured it. And Hazael set his face to go to Jerusalem. Okay, now let me haven't done so. Let me just put this up here real quick, just to remind us of where we are. All right. All right, whereas, and that pen is kind of running out. Let's try another one here. Purple. Everybody likes a purple river, right? All right, where's Aram? All right, remember Jerusalem is right in this area, kind of roughly right in here. This would be Judah. This would be Israel up here, roughly, okay? Aram is up here. What we know is Syria, Damascus, right? Now, where's the city of Gath? Gath is one of the Philistine cities, one of the 5 cities. Now, Philistines had a lot of cities. Gath is one of the 5 major ones, which is somewhere down in this area. Okay, because this area down here is known as Philistia, the land of the Philistines. So here's what happens. Somehow, Hazael gets all the way down here. We don't know, this battle, this kind of military campaign is unknown in history. We don't know about it other than this one reference that he was down here in Gath. And once he conquers Gath, he sets his face on Jerusalem, which is up, this way. Jehoash, king of Judah, and that's helpful, right? We know which one he's talking about. Takes all the sacred things that Jehoshaphat, Joram, Ahaziah, his fathers, kings of Judah, had dedicated, and his own sacred things, and all the gold that was found among the treasuries of the house of the Lord and the king's house, and sent them to Hazael, king of Aram. Why did he do this? He bought them off. You can have anything you want as long as you go away. What did he not do? Apparently he didn't turn to the Lord. Right? He just, let's use money. Where do you think this money came from? From the temple. Right? It was all the sacred things of Jehoshaphat, Joram, Ahaziah's fathers, and his own sacred things. All the gold that was found in the treasuries of the house of the Lord. It seems to me that included in this, there was a lot of money here, a lot of various things, but included in this was the money that people had been dropping off for weeks and months and years for the rehab of the temple. And it's given to Hazael to make him go away. And it succeeds. Now, the rest of the acts of Joash and all he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? And his servants arose, made a conspiracy, and struck down Joash at the house of Millo as he was going down to Silla. Jozachar, the son of Shimeath, and Jehozabad, the son of Shomer, and his servants struck him, and he died, and they buried him with his fathers in the city of David. Interestingly, the story ends in Kings right here. I want to make one quick reference, and we haven't spent a lot of time in 2 Chronicles. Again, when you read it, kind of read them together. We're spending most of our time in Kings, but listen to 2 Chronicles 24. After the death of Jehoiada, the officials of Judah came and bowed down to the king, and the king listened to them. They abandoned the house of the Lord, the God of their fathers. They served the Asherim and the idols, and so wrath came upon Judah and Jerusalem for their guilt. Yet he sent prophets to them to bring them back to the Lord. Though they testified him, they would not listen. Now think about that. All right, the days of Joash, he had Jehoiada the priest, who had a tremendous spiritual influence on him. But what happens when Jehoiada is gone? It appears, for all we can tell from the text, it appears that it wasn't really in Joash's heart. One of the biggest fears, and it comes this way whether we're raising children, working with people at church, all this. Why do people do the things they do? And sometimes it's because there are walls around them, right? And what happens when those walls are gone? If the moral and spiritual character has not been formed, they revert back. And again, there's only a certain amount we can do about that. I think walls are very helpful things. Moral walls of protection, but they're limited. And the reality is, and most of us probably know this from our own lives as well as the lives of others, there's no wall high enough to overcome our own depravity. Right? And we can put up all kinds of things, but in the day when that's gone, then we find out what our heart is really at, where our heart really is. With Joash, his heart was not really in serving God, and the minute Jehoiada is gone, he turns away. People come to him. And the kind of influence that Jehoiada had as a spiritual influence is traded for the influence of these elders, these leaders of Judah. God sent prophets. And they served the Asherim and the idols, so wrath came upon Judah and Jerusalem for this guilt. That's why I said earlier, remember, he did not destroy the high places. People still, that's what I was referring to, is after Jehoiada is gone, they return to idol worship. He sent prophets to them to bring them back to the Lord, and though they testified against them, they would not listen. Does anybody know what comes next? Because it's something that Jesus references, is what comes next. They take Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada, and they kill him in the temple. On the threshold of the temple, they kill the priest who was trying to get them to come back to God. And when Jesus condemns the Jews in Luke 11, he says, you have killed everyone from what? You remember this? Luke 11? From the wisdom of God said, I will send to them prophets and apostles. Some of them they will kill, and some they will persecute. So the blood of all the prophets shed since the foundation of the world may be charged against this generation, from the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, who was killed between the altar and the house of God. It shall all be charged against this generation. Now here's what's interesting is, what is the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah? Those are the bookmarks, the bookends of the Old Testament. 2 Chronicles 24, where their story is told, is the last book of the Hebrew Old Testament. And most of us don't think of it that way, right? Because we think of our English Bibles. Right? 2 Chronicles is a square in the middle of our English Bibles. In the Hebrew Bible, it is right at the end of it. What was Jesus saying? From the beginning of the Old Testament to the end of the Old Testament, I sent you prophet after prophet after prophet, and you persecuted and killed them. And now all of that blood is charged against this generation. Why do you think that was? I think it was because now the ultimate prophet is there. Who was the ultimate prophet? It was Christ. And now you've killed the Son. And Jesus uses that image in a bunch of his teachings about, all these other people came, and now the Son comes, and you reject even the Son. All right? So the blood of Zechariah, righteous Abel Zechariah, are the bookends of the Old Testament, and that happens right here with Joash, who was, in many ways, a good king. He had a good spiritual influence. He restored the house of the Lord, returned the people to the worship of God for a while. But once Jehoiada was gone, because it was not cemented in his heart, he goes back And in the end, he is killed by his own servants and struck down. Amaziah, his son, becomes king. And that's in verse number 21. All right, look at chapter 13. Let's switch over to Israel for a couple of minutes. All right. 23rd year of Joash, the son of Ahaziah, king of Judah, Jehoaz, son of Jehu, becomes king over Israel at Samaria. And again, here's that transfer between Jehoaz is the son of Jehu, but the beginning of his reign is connected to Josiah, or I'm sorry, to Joash. Jehoaz does evil in the sight of the Lord. He follows the sins of Jeroboam. And again, who was Jeroboam? That first king, right? The one who brought the greatest evil. He built, the calves, the golden calves in Bethel and Dan. He instituted his own sacrificial system with his own priests. He didn't follow Levitical priesthood. He established his own religious festivals. Why? In essence, what Jeroboam did was say, all that law of God stuff, I'm setting aside. I'm going to do it my way. And that becomes a pattern of the northern kingdom. So many kings of the north follow in the ways of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. He made Israel sin. He did not turn from them. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he gave them continually in the hand of Hazael, king of Aram, and into the hand of Ben-Hadad, the son of Hazael. Now here's what's interesting is remember when Elisha, Ben-Hadad comes to Elisha, says, am I going to live? He says, yeah. He tell me he's going to live, but he's not. And he starts crying. And why does he cry? Because I know the evil you're going to bring on Israel. And right here it is. Hazael of Aram was a tool of God's judgment on his people. But here's when Joaz, verse number 4, entreated the favor of the Lord listened to him. He saw the oppression of Israel. He knew how the king of Aram oppressed him. That wasn't a surprise. Again, sometimes we read the Bible and we think, well, God finally figured this out. But then we were, no, God had already said this was going to happen. He gave Israel a deliverer. When Jehoash turns to God, even out of his wickedness, God sends a deliverer. Who is the deliverer? It's interesting. It doesn't tell us in this verse. There are two ideas. One is there's an Assyrian king named Adad-Nirari III, who in 805 BC, so about 10 years into Jehoaz's reign, comes against Hazael and severely limits the power of Hazael and his reach. So God may have used an Assyrian king to limit the king of Aram, to limit the persecution of Israel. Now, what's ironic about that? In about another 100 years or so, the Assyrians are going to be the ones that are attacking Israel. But it may be at this point that God uses an Assyrian king to deliver Israel or to release some of the pressure on Israel. It may be Adad-Nirari III. There's another option that it might have been Elisha. And I'll tell you why that is in a second, but let's get there first. Continue down. The rest of the acts of Jehoaz, all that he did, they're written in the book of the Chronicles of Kings of Judah, verse number 8. Kings of Israel, I'm sorry. Jehoaz slept with his fathers. They buried him in Samaria, and Joash, his son, became king in his place. All right, now this is the Jehoash on the Israel side. All right, again, you got to keep these names straight. Okay? You confused yet? I think we need a color-coded Bible, so we can kind of keep who belongs to who here. In the 37th year of Joash, king of Judah, Jehoash, son of Jehoaz, became king over Israel, reigned 16 years. He did evil, did not turn from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. There he is again. The rest of his acts, all he did, fought against Amaziah, king of Judah. They're written in the book of the Chronicles of Kings of Israel. He slept with his fathers. Jeroboam sat on his throne. This is the one after this, and we call him Jeroboam the second, which distinguishes him from Jeroboam the first. That was the easy question for the night. Now here it is, the death of Elijah. When Elisha becomes sick with the illness with which he was to die, Joash, the king of Israel, came down to him and wept over him. This is interesting. Why? Why would Joash come down and weep? I have no idea. I mean, he wasn't loyal to Elisha. He wasn't a God-fearing person. He did evil inside the Lord. He followed the ways of Jeroboam. It may have been that Elisha had such moral authority that he had to go pay his last respects, not because he liked him, but because, it's one of those political things. It's just what you do. I don't know. It's kind of interesting that he calls him my father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen. Apparently, he sees Elisha as the chariots of Israel and its horsemen, as a force in the nation. Right? He recognizes the moral force that Elisha has over the people. Elisha says, take a bow and arrow. Took a bow and arrow. The Lord, then he said to the king of Israel, put your hand on the bow. Put his hand on it. Elisha laid his hands on the king's hands. He said, open the window toward the east. He opened it. So it's interesting how, if you were recording the story, how would you record it? At this point, it's almost pedantic. Take a bow and arrow. So he took a bow and arrow. Put your hand on the bow. So he put his hand on the bow. Open the window. So he opened the window. So, it's almost this kind of, you would just say, hey, take a bow and arrow and shoot an arrow out the window. But for some reason, he kind of stretches us out a little bit in suspense. And he shoots the window. He shoots out the window. And he said, the Lord's arrow of victory, even the arrow of victory over Aram. For you will defeat the Arameans at Aphek until you have destroyed them. Wow. Okay, that's cool. That's good. Then he says, take the arrows. And he took them. And he said to the king of Israel, strike the ground. And he struck it 3 times and stopped. And the man of God was angry with him. He said, you should have struck 5 or 6 times. Then you would have struck Aram until you would have destroyed it. But now you'll strike Aram only 3 times. Now again, as we read this story, it's kind of a strange story, right? Because why do you just randomly shoot an arrow out the window? What was the point of the object lesson? I don't really know. But it was the object lesson that as this arrow flies, this is the arrow of the Lord's victory. Take the arrows in your hand and strike the ground. Now, how in the world was Jehoash supposed to know how many times to strike the ground? Again, it's one of those things I don't know. And why strike the ground? It's not something you do with arrows, right? That's usually not the way you use them. And so maybe Jehoash is kind of, he said to do it. This is kind of weird, but okay. And he hits the ground a couple times, and the man of God gets angry. Again, I don't know how this revealed itself. How this, I don't know what Elisha called him. I can think of a couple names besides Jehoash. But he's angry. Why only 3 times? You had the chance to totally wipe them out, and you stopped at 3. How many of you saw the news story today about the soccer game up in northern Michigan? Brian saw it? I saw it. Kids scored 16 goals in a game. They won 17-0. I'm opposed to that, just for the record. Right? I've coached a lot, and I think there comes a time where if you can't help but score 17 goals, do it, but you better be spread. It better be like 17 different people scoring 17 goals. Bury them. I remember coaching, when we were coaching, we'd run some drills with teams, and we tried to institute this mindset that when you get your opponents on the rope, you bury them. Because we did this drill where if you win, if you lose, you got to run 100 yards and back. And while the other team's resting, we tell the resting team, when they get back here, you better bury them. They are worn out. Bury them right now. Get this one. That's kind of what's going on here. You have a chance to bury them. And you did it 3 times. I don't know how he was supposed to know otherwise. And then Elisha dies. And that's kind of the end of it. It's not kind of drawn out. It's just, you should have struck them so many times, and then Elisha dies. Now the bands of Moabites would invade the land in the spring of the year. They're bearing a man. Behold, they saw a marauding band, and they cast the man into the grave of Elisha. And when the man touched the bones of Elisha, he revived and stood up on his feet. Elisha's last miracle, when he was already dead. Why? Again, I don't know. The author here, God inspired the author to include this story. Again, the life-giving power of Elisha, he's already brought somebody back to life, right? I mean, this is not new, but again, just to show the ongoing moral authority of Elisha, the spiritual power Elisha had. Had to be weird for those guys burying, you know. Here you see this marauding band coming, you know, like, oh, we better get rid of this guy here. They throw him in Elisha's grave, and the scariest thing isn't the marauding band anymore. It's the guy we just buried walking back out. Like, I don't know about that. Hazael, the king of Aram, had oppressed Israel all the days of Joash, but the Lord was gracious to them, had compassion on them, and turned to them because of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and would not destroy them or cast them from his presence until now. Isn't that a beautiful thing? Why did God preserve Israel? It wasn't because of this generation of Israelites, right? It was because he made a promise centuries ago, 1,000, 1,200 years ago by now. He made a promise over 1,000 years ago, and he still keeps his promises. He shows up for his people. When Hazael, the king of Aram, died, Ben-Hadad, his son, became king in his place. Joash, the son of Joaz, took again the hand of Ben-Hadad, the son of Hazael, the cities which he had taken in the war from the hand of Jehoaz, his father. All right, so now they're kind of trading cities back and forth. 3 times Joash defeated him and recovered the cities of Israel. Why 3 times? Because he struck the ground 3 times. Had you done it more, you could have totally wiped him out. When we look at this story, we'll stop here tonight. Let me just encourage you along these lines. First of all, as you read these stories, there are some things that just seem strange to us, right? There are some things that are just historical curiosities. Why did God do it this way? Why did God do it that way? Why this? Why that? At the end of the day, God's writing the story he wanted his people to know, and the story he wants us to know. And there are a lot of things we would like to know that God didn't tell us. But what we do know is that what he gave us was for our instruction so that we, through the patience and comfort of the Scriptures, might have hope. I got a verse on that one, right? What is it? What did I just quote? Anybody? Romans 15:4. The things that were written before were written for our learning, that we, through the patience and comfort of the Scriptures, might have hope. Where's the hope in these stories? I mean, God's ruling over these people. Hazael doesn't just show up out of the blue. God was in control of that. I mean, Athaliah, God was in control, and Joash just, let me grab a kid real quick. And it turns out to be Joash. And the way God is always on his throne. God is always faithful. He preserves and he has compassion because of his covenant. And I remind us all the time, and this is a good time to remind us again, God does not love us because we are good. He loves us because he is good. And that's our ultimate hope. Our ultimate hope isn't, dear God, help me not be like Jehoash. That guy was a loser. If I'm better than him, maybe you'll love me. That's not our ultimate hope. I mean, please, for the sake of us all, be better than Jehoash, all right? It's not a high bar. Try to get there. But that's not the reason. God loves us. God loves us because he's good. And God has compassion. God keeps his promises. And we read all these stories. We should be reminded over and over again, God is sovereign. God is the ultimate king. These guys, and a few ladies thrown in here, these people are servants of God, ministers of God. And we typically wouldn't call them that because a lot of them are evil. But God even uses the evil people to serve his purposes. Why? Because he's sovereign. Because he's good. And lastly, just remind us of this, that in the midst of much of this darkness, and that's what it is, it's darkness, it would be easy to forget that God's in control. And even in our own lives, when we look at a world around us and it seems really broken, and it is, and it seems really messed up, and it is, it would be easy to sit back and wonder, God, where are you? And I remind us, as I try to remind us often, where's God? Where he's always been. He's in heaven doing whatever he pleases. And that's our hope. Not a one of these kings up here was in control. Not a one of them could override God's plan. And in the day, yeah, we fret, we worry, we'd like it to be different. There's that anxiety. You know what? The sun's still going to come up tomorrow. Okay? Trust God. He rules over all things. Take hope in that. As we pray tonight, there's some prayer sheets. Grab a couple people around you there and pray. Keep in mind, I request this every week, just want to again pray particularly for our pastoral search as we're looking for another staff member to come on board with us here and help out. Pray for outreach. We're headed into the holiday season. I know we don't want to think that yet. Although, how many of you already have your Christmas shopping done? I just confess to you, all my Christmas shopping is done because I don't do any. It's been done for like 20 years. When I got married, as part of the vows, got to do the Christmas shopping, honey. She's not in here, but she knows that, trust me. It's going to be here soon, all right? Christmas is one of those times of year where people are more open to the idea of church, the idea of Christ, the idea of God, than any other time during the year. All right? So invite them to church. Be praying about that. We hope this year to have Christmas Eve service. We hope not to do it online, as we had to do last year. We hope to do a real live Christmas Eve service. And so, but I'll be preaching some Christmas messages leading up to that. But again, start to pray now that God will be opening people. And let me just encourage you with this. Again, you've heard me say this. What's the number one reason people visit a church? Somebody they know invites them. It's not social media, it's not advertising, it's not YouTube videos, it's not flyers. All those things can be fine. Number one reason people attend church is because somebody you know invites them. So find somebody you know and invite them. All right? Pray that God be bringing people to himself here at Evangel. And so go to prayer, spend some time in prayer night with those around you. Prayer sheets out here, and see you Sunday night.